Grenade by Alan Gratz, Part 2, pages 191 through 196. The Toilet Sauna. Hideki slogged along the highway with thousands more Okinawans and Japanese. When the crowd reached Shikina, a village just outside Naha, some of the IJA soldiers detoured to a command post cave. Hideki decided to go with them. He was leery of setting foot inside another cave with Japanese soldiers, but he needed something more to eat if he was going to have the energy to find his sister, and the command post would have food. Just the thought of eating made Hideki's head swim and his knees weaken. Almost all his best memories of food were wrapped up with memories of his family. His little brother Isumu, slurping long Okinawa soba noodles with him at the Lantern Festival. His mother dishing up a big bowl of Goya champura, a sloppy, delicious mix of bitter Goya melon and whatever else was in season whenever their cousins visited. He and his father eating rafute, the brown sugar glazed pork belly so delicate it fell apart in their fingers, burning his mouth on deep fried sata andagi, a kind of round donut ball, at a food stall with Kimiko on their way home from one of her Yuta house calls. Hideki began to miss his family more than he did a warm meal, and then his appetite for food was erased completely by the sights and smells that greeted him at the command post. The post was hot, humid, and stinky. Buckets of human waste festered in the corridors. Bags of fermenting, ruined rice sat in puddles of water on the floor. Soldiers walked around in nothing but their loincloths to battle the heat, and no one here had bathed in months. The command officers took turns sticking their heads up the ventilation shafts, desperate for a breath of fresh air. It was like a toilet mixed with a sauna, and Hideki gagged. One of the half-naked soldiers spied Hideki and grinned. "Hey, girls," he called. "One of your boyfriends has arrived." Boyfriend? Girls? What was he talking about? And then Hideki saw them. Nurses. Student nurses, like his sister. They were tending to dozens of injured Japanese soldiers, all laid out on boards. The Shikina command post was also a field hospital. Hideki rushed over to the nearest nurse, a girl just a year or two older than he was. She was wrapping a dirty brown bandage around a soldier's wounded arm. "Do you have a nurse here named Kimiko?" Hideki asked her. "She's my sister." The girl shook her head. She hadn't heard of a nurse named Kimiko, and neither had any of the other people Hideki asked. The excitement Hideki had felt on seeing nurses ebbed away like the tide, and the oppressive heat and stink returned. It was too much to hope that he'd find his sister in the first place he looked. "Come out!" someone yelled in broken Japanese through the cave entrance. "Come out with hands up!" Hideki froze. The Americans were here, right outside the cave. They were calling for everyone to come out and surrender. "We should do it," Hideki said to a Japanese corporal. "We should all surrender." The soldier stepped away from Hideki in disgust. "Surrender?" he said. "Never!" Hideki grimaced. The IJA would never give up a command post without a fight, which meant they were all going to die. Hideki grabbed the arm of the first nurse he had talked to. "Quick, is there another way out of this cave?" he asked. "Yes," she told him, "at the back." "Go, go," Hideki told her. "But the patients," the girl said. At the cave entrance, an American soldier peeked inside, his rifle raised. One of the guards at the door slipped out of the shadows and bayoneted him in the gut, and the American screamed. "Everybody get out now!" Hideki yelled, and suddenly the air itself exploded. Liquid, dripping flames came shooting through the entrance of the cave, torching the guards and anyone else within 20 feet. The sauna of the command post became an oven. A handful of grenades came clattering in with the flames, and ba-boom! The cave entrance collapsed in an explosion of rock and dirt. Hideki cried out again for everyone to run, but no one was listening anymore. Everyone was screaming and yelling and stampeding for the back of the cave. Soldiers pushed civilians out of the way, and wounded men on the floor cried out for help as they were trampled. Hideki pushed the nurses ahead of him toward the back of the cave. Something came pouring down the ventilation shafts above, splashing everyone ahead of him. Hideki recognized the smell from the car that had brought the Japanese photographer to his school. Gasoline. The American monsters were pouring gasoline down the ventilation shafts. A box full of grenades clattered down through the holes, and Hideki knew what came next. He grabbed an empty meal cabinet that stood against the wall and pulled it down on top of himself and the nearest nurse. The cabinet had just banged down on top of them when, kathoom! The command post became an inferno. The explosion of the grenades touched off the ammunition the Japanese army had stored in the cave. The ground beneath Hideki and the nurse rocked like an earthquake, but the metal cabinet stayed on top of them, protecting them from the worst of it. Whoosh! The nurse next to Hideki screamed, and it was only minutes later that Hideki realized he was screaming too. Through their shrieking, they could hear the metal of the cabinet popping as it twisted and warped in the heat. Hideki and the nurse huddled closer as the heat bore down on them. Hideki's bare foot touched the metal cabinet, and it burned against his skin like a wood stove. With a start, Hideki remembered the grenade in his pocket. How insulated was a ceramic grenade? Would the intense heat set it off? What if he and the nurse had found a safe place in the fiery cave only for his grenade to blow them both to pieces? But there was no place he could throw the grenade now without lifting the cabinet and exposing them to the flames. Hideki curled himself tight around the grenade instead, hoping to shield the nurse from the blast if it went off. After what seemed like years, the roar of the fire outside died away, and Hideki and the nurse stopped screaming. Hideki's throat was ragged and tight, and his whole body still shook with fear, but he was alive. He put a hand to the cabinet wall. It was hot to the touch. He lifted the cabinet with his back instead, putting Ray's backpack between him and the hot metal. No one had survived except Hideki and the girl. The bodies of nurses and soldiers lay all around them. The girl retched at the sight. Hideki didn't. Heaven help me, Hideki thought. I've gotten used to it. Hideki took the girl by the hand and ran as quick as he could for the exit at the back of the cave.